Hello, Bow Church. As we encounter Easter, I want to take us through Mark's Gospel and do a speedy tour through the whole of the book of Mark and lead us to the Easter events at the end. The first chapter of Mark, in fact, the very first verse, really functions a bit like a film poster. You know, when you see a poster, like particularly a Marvel comic poster, or think of like Lord of the Rings or something like that, or Harry Potter, you see certain characters. You see Frodo, you see Gandalf in like, I don't know, I don't really watch the Marvel films so much, but in Harry Potter, you'll see like Harry with his wand and maybe Dumbledore in the background. And these characters and these themes give you an indication of what's to come. Or like in a movie trailer as well, like how it just shows you really what's everything that's going to happen. Well, the very first verse of Mark's Gospel is like a movie poster that sets up all the key themes that will be followed through for the whole of Mark. So let's turn to Mark 1 and have a look. The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's it. That tells you an awful lot. And that's our three themes. And the three themes we're going to look at in this talk are all in that one verse. The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The first theme is in the words, Jesus, the Messiah. This is the theme of Israel. The Messiah was the hoped-for hero, because the word simply means set apart or anointed one. Prophets, priests, and kings were anointed in the Old Testament. And this word Messiah means set apart, anointed one. And the wild-eyed prophets in the back end of the Old Testament started to talk of a Messiah, an anointed one that would come. And he would be the anointed one that would put all things right. Israel's hope, Israel's fulfillment would come in this one man. And at times he sort of seems to be like a god. And at times he seems to be described a bit more like a man. And this anointed one will be the deliverer of Israel and the fulfillment of all that Israel is meant to be. It will bring in the ancient Exodus story of deliverance, of liberation from captivity to freedom. There's a hope for this Messiah. And Mark's Gospel begins by saying Jesus, which is just a normal name, it's a first name, just a regular guy called Jesus, is the Messiah. The next theme, the Son of God. This is a crazy phrase to read in a book like this, because the phrase the Son of God is really a phrase that comes from the Roman Empire, not from the Jewish faith. The Son of God is a phrase that would make everyone think at the time of the Caesars, who considered themselves to be more than just humans, but actually divine. And so when Caesar Augustus was born, letters would go out to say, always to say like, a God has arrived. And the phrase would be the Son of God, the huios theos, which rhymes and sounds lovely. But the phrase, the Son of God. The Caesars were considered to be these divine rulers. And Mark's introduction, the first verse, says that Jesus is not only the Messiah, but also the Son of God. But the third theme, if the first is Israel, the second is Rome, the third theme is Eden. And we get that in the simple phrase, the beginning. What's the very first verse of the Bible? It's in the book of Genesis chapter 1, and it's the same. In the beginning. Now, bearing in mind that even a fairly uneducated Jew at the time would have memorized the first 5 books in the Bible and most of the Psalms, the words of the Jewish scriptures would be in the minds of normal people. And so when you hear these phrases from the Old Testament, it crop up in the New Testament, it makes people's brains instantly spark. And there's no way that people would have not heard the phrase in the beginning without thinking of Eden, that perfect place that was lost. And so we have these three themes in what's known in ancient letter writing as an incipit, which is to basically say your introduction, your first statement sets up your entire letter. 3 themes: Israel, Rome, and Eden. Israel, the Messiah, Rome, the Son of God, and Eden in the beginning. And then the rest of the book of Mark is really a bit like a murder mystery. It's a bit of a whodunit type situation because it's driven by one question, which is, who is Jesus? And that seems to be on the lips of his enemies and his friends. But as this remarkable man does remarkable things that only God was able to do at the time, forgive sins and perform miracles, the question goes everywhere. So in chapter 8, Peter is asked by Jesus, who do you say I am? It's been on everybody's lips, and now Jesus turns to his disciples, perhaps his even closest disciple, apart from John. It's a bit of a competition, but anyway, but Peter is asked this question, who do you say I am? And Peter responds, you are the Christ. Now, the word Christ, the Greek word Christos, again, it's not Jesus' surname, but it's the word that means anointed one. In Hebrew, it's the Messiah, Mashiach. In Greek, it's Christos. And Peter is saying that you are the anointed one. You're the one that we're all hoping for. It's a hinge. That moment works like a hinge. The whole gospel has been driven by this question, who is Jesus? With these themes in the background of Israel, Rome, and Eden floating. And now they come to this critical moment, and Peter's confession that Jesus is the Christ turns the whole story. Because the whole rest of the gospel, it's literally about halfway through the word count, if you do a little search, is not about who Jesus is. We take Peter's words, but it's actually about what kind of Messiah he will be, what kind of Christ. And this reveals something significant, really, about Mark's gospel. Most people would say none of this can be proved, but most people would say that this is probably Peter's audio. Most people would probably say that the Gospel of Mark is probably Peter dictating. The whole story follows Peter so closely, and not only follows him closely, but it shows all kinds of ways in which he messes up and makes mistakes and does stupid things. And it would almost be humiliating for such a famous church leader, such a respected person. You couldn't write about a guy like Peter and get away with it, apart from if there was one thing going on. It was in fact Peter himself that's telling the story. And because Peter wasn't necessarily incredibly educated, it is likely that it's Mark's gospel, Mark's writing it down, but it's Peter telling the story, saying, Mark, you'll never guess what I did next. Mark, I was so stupid. Jesus was transfigured before me, and I said, why don't we put up a Euro-hike tent and try and sort it out? You'll never guess. Jesus said, walk on water, and I did, and then I got panicked and I fell. It was awkward. It's Peter's confession. And of all his confessions, this is the one that really counts, because the whole narrative turns on it. When Jesus turns to his disciples and said, who do you say I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ. Well, the next part, like I said, is what kind of Christ? And if you read as it goes from chapter 8 into chapter 9, you get this awkward, really, really tense conversation between Jesus and Peter, where Jesus then starts to talk about what kind of Messiah he'll be, and Peter said, oh, no. You've forgotten this whole theme that we have as Israel. What we carry with us of the Messiah is about you being a hero. You're meant to free the land from foreign oppressors, restore right worship in this land, and that's got to be probably with another kind of emperor in charge, by you cutting the head off Caesar, not being killed. Because the kind of Messiah Jesus is not the kind that wields a sword, but who suffers. He says that the Son of Man will suffer and die, and on the third rise again. And Peter can't deal with that, so he takes him to one side and has a word. It's like, look, I've literally just embarrassed myself in front of my friends and said, you are the Messiah. And now you're talking about dying. Messiahs don't die. It's the one thing they don't do. They actually meant to set us free and be the great heroes and military leaders. You're not meant to die. But Jesus says brutal words and says, get behind me, Satan. He says, well, you are wrong, Peter. And so the story goes on, and Peter could only have, I think those words could only be there if Peter himself was saying them to Mark. And so the story goes on, the narrative goes on, and Jerusalem now comes on the horizon. From Peter's confession onwards, Jerusalem is on the horizon. And Jesus says 2 more times what type of Messiah he'll be. He gives 3 predictions of his death. And the disciples, perplexed by this, continue to follow him towards the moment that the whole narrative comes to in Jerusalem in Holy Week. And at the Easter event, these 3 themes are resolved. The theme of Israel, the theme of Rome, and the theme of Eden. The theme of Israel is fulfilled in the fact that Jesus dies in the center of the most important Jewish festival of all, Passover, when they remembered the original story of liberation, when Moses led the people out of captivity in Egypt and towards the promised land, a moment of liberty. It was always the hope of Israel that it would be a light to the nations, and here it is. Again, a story of liberation, not just for Israel, but for the whole world. The story of Israel is fulfilled. The theme has its completion on the cross, where not just the situations of Israel, but the common situation we all face, the situation of sin, is overcome by the costly love of God. And we are given pure grace on the cross. Israel, the theme fulfilled. Secondly, Rome. The theme of Rome that we saw in verse 1 of chapter 1, this idea of the Son of God, is fulfilled in one dramatic moment at the cross. In Mark 15, verse 39, at the point in which Jesus dies and breathes his last, it says, now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that he died in this way, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. You see, this verse, it's kind of that moment in a film when the music has gone to the extreme. And then there's just a stillness and a silence. Because what's going to be said now is just unthinkable. A centurion is a Roman soldier. It's almost certain that Mark's gospel, Peter's account, has been written down under persecution, a situation where Christians in Rome are being killed. So the word centurion sounds like terrorist or thug or assassin, hitman. There would have been people who read this book and heard it read, who knew centurions that had killed members of their family. And it is a moment of radical fulfillment of a key and central idea of Jesus, of who he is, which is that the human powers of injustice and violence are undermined at the cross. The idea of Rome was of human oppression. Rome was like advertising, but with one brand. Everywhere you went, all you would see is Rome, 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 Caesar, 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 and this phrase, Son of God. On the coin, Son of God. Caesar is a son of God. It is a centurion who first calls Jesus Son of God. He stands at the cross and sees Jesus for who he is. This question of who Jesus is fulfilled by Jesus dying in the middle of the Passover festival, fulfilling the story of Israel and of a Roman centurion right in the middle of a scandal where Rome was overcoming the world with its own ambition of power. The most powerful one, the only really powerful one, dies, and a centurion sees this is really the Son of God. Lastly, the theme of Eden. The theme of Eden is fulfilled a couple of days later, when in chapter 16, the disciples who've buried Jesus' body in disappointment are surprised when Mary returns with news that Jesus is not dead, but Jesus is alive. Death couldn't hold him. Jesus overcame the ultimate enemy. And so the theme of Eden is resolved by Jesus' resurrection, because the God of creation hasn't given up that title. And he's recreating all things by overcoming death, and now being alive in Jesus, we are receiving this new life, this new creation. It's a new dawn. It's a new day. I'm not going to sing the song. Can't sing even if I wanted to, but it would be cheesy. Let's be honest if I did. But it is new, and it is a new dawn, and it is a new day in Jesus' resurrection for us. These three themes resolved at the Easter events: Israel, Rome, and Eden. And so what we're left with is an answer to the question, who is Jesus? The first half of the book of Mark led us to the point where Peter, who's dictating this story, says, this is the Messiah. And then the second half of the book shows us what kind of Messiah he'll be, the one who suffers, dies, and rises again. And then these dramatic events resolve these three ideas introduced in the very first verse as a film poster, and we've now seen the whole film, and we know what happens to Snape and Frodo and all the characters of the story. They're resolved at the death and resurrection of Jesus, and so we're left with one question, you and I. Who is Jesus? Who do we say he is? Who do you say he is? Well, the answer is in his name. I've said what Christ means, but the word Jesus is an important name. Jesus was called Yeshua. Yeshua is a word that if you take it apart, you find it means God who takes his people out of captivity and into a wide open space. It's the God who saves. Jesus' name is he who saves. Salvation is to be rescued, to be taken out and taken from that place of captivity and that awful hemmed in space of human life. When we're left alone with ourselves, when sin has turned us inward, and to be led out. His name is salvation. His name is Yeshua. To be saved is to be rescued. To be saved is to be rescued. Now you have to agree that you need to be rescued. And I frankly, in my own life, I've come to know that. I don't feel like I'm in control. I don't feel like I've got it all sorted. I make mistakes. I don't do the things that I said I would. I can't live consistently. And humanity as a whole, we need to be rescued. We need salvation. It's easy to say words like Jesus is the Savior, Jesus saves me. And if you go to church and have been around Christianity, these words are just, they're in the creeds, they're in our Bible, they're in our songs that we sing, and that's fine. But I want to think about what is your functional Savior. And I'll tell you what your functional Savior is, what actually saves you, what actually rescues you. It's whatever story you tell as you put your head on the pillow at the end of the night. We all do it. We all, as we get ready for bed, even if we've been distracting ourselves with things like Netflix and booze, we all at some point, when we're brushing our teeth and we're going towards bed, putting our head on that pillow, we just say something like this: it'll be different tomorrow. I only did that today because da-da-da-da-da. Tomorrow I'm going to go for a run. Tomorrow I'm not going to eat da-da-da. I'm not going to say it tomorrow. I won't do it. We tell a story that gives an account of our life. It justifies our life. And even the worst people in the world go to bed and have to tell themselves some type of story to make sense of themselves so they can go to sleep. It happened because of the other thing that happened to me back then. It wasn't my fault. I'm just doing this because it's what I've been taught to do. Whatever we blame, whatever we choose to say, whatever we promise to ourselves we will do or won't do, that is your functional savior. It's the story you tell about your own life that justifies it. Well, in the Christian faith, we have this idea of justification by faith, which is simply saying that the story that you tell is that you have faith in Jesus, which is to say, the story you tell is that you trust Jesus, you lean on him. I'll tell you how you know you have faith in something, you lean on it. If you're sitting down, you have faith on the seat you're sitting in. You expressed great faith when you sat down on it, reasonable faith, because you probably sat on it before and it didn't break. But that's what faith looks like. To have faith in Jesus as your Savior is simply to put your head on the pillow and say, Jesus came as a fulfillment of a story of liberation from slavery, from sin to freedom. Jesus came as a subversion to human power and violence. The one true power revealed himself on the cross. Jesus came and he died and rose again as evidence that God is renewing all things, as the beginning of restoration. That story is a gift that's been given to me. I lean my life against it. It makes sense of my failures and it makes sense of my longings. It's the story I live in. That's what it means to have faith in Jesus and to call him your Savior. So I leave you with this question: who is Jesus? And I hope that when you put your head on the pillow tonight, you'll be able to say, he is my Savior.